It is 5:31. I'll call us into session, regular city council meeting. And now we'll call to order. We'll go to item number 1, which is city manager. I guess you're going to do the presentation?
I guess I am. Yeah, I was making sure Julie wasn't here. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, as you're aware, we are in the process of applying to become a Main Street program with the Texas Historical Commission. Part of the application process requires us to have a resolution from our governing body. You have before you this evening a proposed resolution authorizing us and recognizing that we are applying to become a 2021 Main Street program. I'll entertain any questions. Oh, it's staff's recommendation that staff respectfully recommends the passage of this resolution.
Anybody have any questions?
One question. On section 3, it says that the city manager, and then in parentheses, or state designee, be designated to supervise the Main Street manager activities. Does that, is state designee, is that, or city designee?
I think that's just a.
Or is that
we
just a
missed
state
from the
wording?
template. I think we just need to remove those words.
Unless you want to say or designee, but I would say that
I would think it would be city manager or designee.
that's, yes, sir, we'll make that change.
Anybody else?
Is there a cost associated with the application process, Mr. Barnes?
No, sir, but acceptance into the program is $500 per year. I believe it's $500.
Okay, to remain in the program.
That's correct.
Okay, and the benefits of that program are?
Benefits of the program are, the Texas Main Street program is part of the Main Street USA. It provides training and professional assistance to the city in preserving its historic downtowns. One of the services that it provides for the building owners downtown is it provides limited architecture services by if like CETA has the facade program. If a building downtown wants to participate or to change its facade, we can ask somebody from one of the folks from Main Street to come in and design the facade to match what the original facade should have and probably did look like. They have two I think they're called historical architects on staff that do that free of charge to the store owners or the building owners. Not only that, there's I'll call it a separate pot of money maintained by the Texas Department of Agriculture for Main Street programs. It's part of the Texas Capital Fund. It's actually a bifurcated system. The Texas Capital Fund is a very competitive field. However, the grants available to Main Street programs in the state of Texas are designated for Main Street programs. There, I believe, as of this year, are 91 of them. Therefore, the competitive level is quite a bit smaller. The city I was employed with prior to coming here has been a Main Street program for approximately 15 to 20 years. I don't remember the exact number, but I do know that they had received multiple numbers of these grants, which I don't know if I said or not, go to a limit of $500,000. And the time I was there, I know we received 2 of them in the almost 6 years I was there.
Okay.
Isn't there a tax break when the person takes it back to the original as well? There's some tax benefit to the business owner
I believe so.
for making it, whatever you call it, restoring it.
I believe so, yes, sir.
Anybody else? Questions? Do I hear a motion?
Mr. Mayor, I move that the council approve resolution number 2020-R-17
17.
with the the one change on section 3, city manager or designee.
Here, a second. Motion and a second. Further discussion? Proceed to vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Next item is expansion of city's personal services business loan program to include locally owned downtown businesses.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, you'll recall several weeks ago, months ago, we established the loan/grant program to assist the one-on-one businesses that were required to be closed by governor's orders. We have awarded 10 of those grants for a total of $25,000. There are, I think, 16 left for a total of $40,000 available. Originally, we brought to you an idea to extend the program to locally owned downtown businesses. However, it was expressed to us that we should go back to the drawing board and discuss ways to include businesses outside of the historic downtown district. We have done so, and I have to compliment Mr. King and Jeff Sanford, our economic developer. They worked during my absence last week. We had done some preliminary work. They did the actual yeoman's work on this. You have in front of you both an application and an agreement. What they did, and I concur, is they have come up with a way to impact retail businesses in our community with a gross annual sales of less than $1 million. The number was actually open for interpretation. I lost my train of thought because I just got a text from Mr. Sanford. There are 14 of them left. The number for the annual gross sales was open for debate. They bounced around 250, 500. In talking with Mr. Haskey today, he and I felt like perhaps $1 million was a good number. It certainly would not avail itself to the Walmarts of the world, but it would help some of our larger sales local businesses that $2,500 may make a difference to.
Questions?
And this program would be available to any locally owned business, is that correct?
Yes, sir. That's our goal in this.
Would that include locally owned franchises?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So it's not limited to just, well, locally owned retail business.
Locally owned retail businesses, that's correct.
Which my question, I mean, by retail, we're defining that as what?
Sales tax?
Yes, and there's-
Generator, yeah.
And there's a requirement to furnish sales tax receipts as
So
part of the application process.
Anybody that's collecting sales tax and rendering it to the state is eligible then? That's one thing.
Other questions?
So there's, the gross receipt number has no impact on someone, so a guy that makes $200,000 a year just is eligible, just as,
Guy that makes $999,900.
so there, I mean, there's no difference in the way it's applied across the scale.
Correct.
Anybody else? Do I hear a motion?
Mayor, I make a motion to approve the expansion of the city's personnel services business loan grant program. I'll second it.
Chris makes the motion, Gerald seconds it. Further discussion? Proceed to vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Same sign opposed. Motion passes. if I'm not mistaken, that ends the agenda for the city council meeting tonight. So we're going to stand adjourned at 5:41. And I'll immediately call us into city council work group meetings, and we'll turn it over to Chairman, Mr. Robinson.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll call to order the Parks and Leisure Services Committee. Only item to discuss tonight is staff report on the green ribbon application, and I'll turn it over to Ms. Basham.
Good evening. So we have 10 beds that we're proposing for Phase 2 of the Green Ribbon Project. This year, when we were looking at applications, we looked at all of our entry portals into the city, so gateway areas, in addition to some of the areas that are just big through roads for visitors and tourists alike. So when people are driving into the city of Stephenville, there's something that kind of demarks when you're entering the area. Knights Inn is the most expensive one, and then we have 5 other areas that we're looking at. The challenge that we have is we are only eligible for $400,000 a year. So we need to prioritize which beds the committee and council would like to support, or if you would like to support application this year. So staff has a few different variations of which ones we could apply for. The only city match is for the grant administration and landscape design. We have designed these beds similar to the Phase 1 beds, where there's not any recurring costs as far as plant material. They're all perennials, they're all native drought tolerant plants, so the maintenance cost is actually much lower than anticipated. We put the anticipated maintenance cost higher on here based on some other cities, but after additional looking through those today, we realized they still had quite a bit of perennial plantings. So our maintenance cost would be substantially lower, and our current contractor bid us out at about $1,000 a bed. So really, we're looking at $10,000 to $12,000 in maintenance cost a year versus what we're looking at, what we were anticipating at $50,000 a year. The only variations would be if, you know, traffic, if there's a wreck or someone drives through a bed, there's additional maintenance cost in those situations. If there's irrigation repairs that need to be done outside of normal routine maintenance, those would be additional cost. But we're looking at $10,000 to $12,000 a year in the maintenance cost for these beds, not the $50,000 that's actually in your staff report.
All right, thank you. Any comments or anything from the committee? Questions?
So we're gonna have to, oh, sorry.
You're good.
So we need to decide which of the beds we want to attack. It's not, the grant's not open for the $1 million.
Now, what we're anticipating doing is putting Phase 2 and Phase 3 together in the application with our prioritization intact, so they know what we're asking for, and then the next would go to Phase 3 for application for next year. A few of these are redo of existing beds, especially the one by CVS. I know that's an eyesore currently. We were not eligible for funding for that bed last year because TxDOT was in the middle of a feasibility study for the most thoroughfares, so we weren't able to get that bed approved last year, but it is being re-proposed this year. So that is really the only bed that's a redo. All of these other beds are new beds. They're not existing currently.
Any other questions? Anyone outside the committee?
Question. The existing beds, you said other than the CVS bed out there by CVS, the other existing beds, so where do they fit in this overall plan?
So the bulk of those are in the Phase 1 that we were approved for
That we were
last
already
year.
doing.
Yes, and so we had an August let date, so we are letting right now. We have pre-construction meetings with TxDOT actually tomorrow afternoon, so those beds should get started this fall.
And so this will be for the next round?
Yes,
Which will
sir.
be next year?
Yeah, so it'd be about this time next year before you saw these beds getting completed.
Jen, do I understand this right, that you've got over $1 million worth of projects here, but there's only $400,000 that's available for a
Yes.
grant for a city for a single year?
Yes,
So we need to select which ones we choose to do, at least for this year.
yes.
Will it be open for us to come back next year and look again at the ones that we don't get done this year?
Yes, basically, we've master planned all of our green ribbon beds, and so we decide which ones we're applying for this year, we'll put them all in, and when TxDOT says, well, you have 400,000, you can pay for these other beds yourself, or you can wait until next year's funding, and we'll take these as your next year's application. So that's what we're anticipating doing. We just need council's direction on which beds you guys would like us to start with.
Jim, do you have, just off the top of your head, do you remember what the annual maintenance cost was on the beds that have already been approved?
So our current contract is $26,500. When they're redone, we're looking at an additional $9,000 based on our contractor's quote. So we're still within that 35 that we had planned. We're not above our budget.
This would add an additional 10 to 12.
10 to 12, yes, sir.
All right.
And realistically, it'd be 5 to 6 depending on which beds you pick, and then another 5 to 6 the year after that.
Are you looking for us to tell you today which beds we're interested in? Or just?
Step 1, would you guys like to apply this year? And then step 2, yes, which beds would you prefer us to prioritize?
Okay.
Does this grant, since this would be phase 2, also does not require a match?
No, it does not. This grant in itself does not require a match. The only thing we have to do is grant administration.
Apply for it.
Any idea from the committee on how we want to proceed?
Mr. Chair, if I might ask a question, in your opinion, with this year's budgetary issues being less than settled at this point, do we need to try to stay under that 400,000 rather than add something that might exceed that?
You're asking my opinion. I would definitely stay under the grant that's my opinion. Yeah.
That was what
For
I
sure
was
not go
thinking.
over.
That was what I was thinking also. Can we add something later, Jen, if we choose to add another bed at mid-year budget or something like that, or is this just?
The grant will get approved in September, so once it's been approved, we'll have to select our beds at that time.
Okay.
I think this is just a master plan, and we would do one bed a year.
Yeah.
Roll.
One area.
One or
Right.
two
Yeah.
areas a year.
To get them all going.
Whatever the grant match is, take the free money. So really, all we're trying to decide is, do we want to spend $5,000 this year in our budget for an area? Correct.
And there will be funding allocated from the annual grant match money that we leave in that undesignated general fund account for the landscape design and the grant administration. So that contract is attached to your agenda as well.
Which if we take care of them, they can look really good in some cities, so just,
Well, and we're really trying to mitigate not putting plant material in there that requires annual planting, so that you guys aren't in a situation like you are with our existing beds where everything died out and you weren't able to replant
they
it because
actually
the
look
funding was
worse than
cut.
cement.
Yes, and unfortunately, Green Ribbon does not allow hardscape. It goes against the whole point of it because it's supposed to have environmental quality.
All right. It's the pleasure of the committee.
But we don't need to pick a bed right now, we just need to.
First, do you want to do it? Second, we have a few different ways. The biggest bang for your buck that you're gonna get is Barker and Lingleville will give you 3 beds, or Glen Rose and Lingleville will give you 3 beds, or you could do the Knights Inn, which has 4, but it's just one intersection, and it's not an entry portal, it's a through road. Otherwise, you're gonna exceed that 400,000, and you could do Glen Rose, Lingleville, and Morgan Mill, and you'd get 4 beds, but it would need another 45,000 from that annual grant match. So I didn't think that was something you guys would like to pursue.
Mr. Chair, can I make a suggestion?
Yes, sir.
We maximize $400,000,
Yeah.
whatever that equals to.
That's what I would,
Whatever, just get, whatever bed,
I
kind
don't
of
know how
motion,
to
get
make that as a
them.
motion, but I think just maximize the 400,000 money and so I guess I will make a
Much emphasis on entry
motion
cost.
to move forward with the application with a limit up to $400,000 cap spending.
Second.
All right, motion made, second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Same sign opposed. Motion passes. And I believe that'll conclude.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Huckabee.
All right. So I will call the Development Services Committee to order. Our first thing that we're going to talk about tonight, we've had some discussion about it, and some council members have asked us to review our sidewalk requirement waiver process through the subdivision ordinance. So that's the first thing we're going to talk about, and I'll turn it over to Steve.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Steve, could you go up here to the microphone because we're on recording now?
Mayor, Council. So as Mr. Huckabee or Councilmember Huckabee mentioned, this was a discussion on July 7th where we were considering a recommendation from the Planning and Zoning Commission for a denial of a sidewalk waiver request. You guys upheld the denial but asked if we come back for consideration and discussion of this particular ordinance. In your packet, I've included the sidewalk provision and then the entire subdivision ordinance for your consideration. Also, looking at our system, these are not all that frequent. We've had 12 since May of 2017. So not a lot of waivers submitted, but indeed when they are submitted, it puts us in a position where we sometimes have to make difficult decisions that impact our residents. So here to answer any questions, but staff is seeking direction from council on how we can possibly alleviate this concern.
And so what I would like to do is first open it up within the committee for Gerald, Mark, or Ricky to kind of give your thoughts. I know that some of you guys were the ones concerned about how we're doing this process. I can kind of keep it at a higher level kind of beginning, and then we feel like we need to dig into the details, we can. But just open it up to what you guys would like to see different, or ideas that you guys have that wanted it to be discussed. So, did that come out?
You want to jump in?
I'm not on the committee.
I thought you were on the committee.
No, sir.
I'll jump in, no problem.
Both feet, right?
Yeah, you bet. So I think kind of one of the things is, and we've kind of had this discussion before about this is a mandate that we've put that if you're going to develop in Stephenville, you got to have it. I'm in favor of sidewalks. No ifs, ands, or buts, no question about it. But it is a mandate that we've done. So how can we come up with a way to help offset some of the costs? Say, if we're going to mandate that you have to have curb gutter and sidewalks anytime you develop within the city, how can the city pay for a third of it? And to help offset some of that development cost? How do we put a funding package together to do that? I think one of the other concerns that's come up is, roadways that are not maintained and owned by the city of Stephenville. So can you incorporate into this that roadways that are controlled and owned by the city of Stephenville must have curb and gutter, no waivers, others you can waive. So on 67, 914, Lincolnville Highway, and so on and so forth. So put that distinction in the ordinance. I know that's come up in the past as well. And I mean, I'm just spitballing on all of this stuff, but to me, if you believe that sidewalks add to the intrinsic value of Stephenville, Texas, then they need to be in the code, in the ordinance. We need to have them. And if we're going to have that as part of our ordinance, it seems to me that it's a part of the ordinance. This is what you have to do. So the question becomes, is there a way, like with other development projects, that the city can kick in to help offset some of that cost? And I have no idea what the answer to that question. I just don't know. I mean, I can investigate it, I guess, but I don't know.
As the chairman of the finance committee, I come up with that.
Really, that was a slap.
Well,
I understand what you're saying, absolutely.
One of the ways that you might do it is what I talked about last night, what we talked about. You scrape the sales tax, the elasticity off the sales tax every year, and you throw it into a fund, and maybe that's the seed money for doing something like this.
Well,
I mean,
that would certainly be a possibility, but another thing, Mark, that Finance Committee maybe, or Development Services could look at and ask the staff to do would be to seriously consider a special assessment district for new development that would finance the roads, the sidewalks, the curb and the gutter and the things like that for the developer. But it would be tied, since you would be using revenue bonds to do it, it would be tied strictly to that property, no matter who owned it, until it was paid off. So in effect, it's not pledging any general fund to it. So that would be one way to do it, and one way the cities have done it, and one way that then, in effect, you're giving a developer a 10 or 15-year period there of financing at bond rates. And the city will always get paid because the land is what it's tied to. Not to the developer, it's tied to the land. And so whoever owns the land has got to pay that assessment, and that's on top of property tax. But since it's spread out over a period of time, and it would also encourage the developer to sell as soon as possible, obviously, and or to develop them and sell them as soon as possible, but it would also, from the city standpoint, would allow the city to get the kind of roads, sidewalks, street, curb and gutter developed to the city standards that it's looking for. Things that are going to last from a long time. Fort Worth has used this a lot. There's 6 or 8 or 10 of these things operating in Fort Worth right now. And you know, that's something that we could explore and look at. You were looking at a potential, well, how could we make it a little bit better? Instead of just giving the money out there, well, why not finance it? And that way we're not out the dollars, but you're financing it over a period of time and using the city's capability of doing that. Something to think about. I think we ought to explore that kind of thing. But because that might solve the sidewalk issue, but it would also serve the curb and gutter and the paving and the road
I
issue
think
too.
that may solve some of your financial restrictions, but I think a lot of the 12 that we've had, you're talking neighborhoods that don't have them, or 914.
Yeah.
And I go back to where I think you can get overcomplicated, because if you say all state roads or state roads we don't control, well, what about Washington or places like that when we have development? And we've said that there's no, so putting an overlay, I feel like gets pretty complex and complicated way that may have unintended consequences as well.
I think some of those state-controlled roads, the curb and gutter may not be necessary there. That's probably where sidewalks are the most necessary, because, walking or biking down a shoulder that doesn't exist on Lincolnville Road is very dangerous. So, any new development along Lincolnville, that would be an area you would certainly want sidewalks. So.
Well, I'm not saying that you exempt them, I'm saying that you leave the waiver opportunity for state roads and streets that we don't have, that the city doesn't own. All I'm saying is the waiver is a possibility there.
So is
But it
it,
would not be in other places, is what you're saying,
On a
Mark.
city-owned road, it would not, in no way were available.
I tend to agree with you, particularly if we could put it together with some type of a finance package to assist
Well, I know
in the
there's-
improvements.
Yeah, I think that there's got to be ways to
There are.
do this. I know we have the little sidewalk program already. I mean, it's small, it wouldn't be of this, to this scale. But even to the point, Brandon, about the waivers that have been granted at the end of a road that doesn't have any sidewalks, if you never have a sidewalk, you're never gonna have a sidewalk, and
but, so, just because I live there, so Blue Bonnet, I lived there, there was an empty lot between us. Everything else is built out. If they were going to build on that road, on that empty lot, putting a sidewalk in there, that would never go, most likely never go anywhere because you would need 15 citizens to make it connect to any street. So that's where I understand the frustration of part of it, but I think that you need some of that leeway for some of that. It's kind of my opinion on it. I mean, I don't,
well, I don't even know if you could break it up, so, like, to me, the place that, I mean, you're talking about a development that's built in the 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s, in that time frame. But if you look at some of the older parts of town where you've got a little bit of sidewalk here,
Yeah.
there's no sidewalk here, maybe you identify, specific areas. Maybe it's done geographically, because the older areas would seem to me to be the ones most prime for removal and redevelopment. More so than, Blue Bonnet or Dale and Tanglewood or that area out there where this has kind of happened.
on those areas where we've got our sidewalk plan, the German crew, I mean,
Right.
that filter in around the schools and areas like that.
But to me, that, it makes, that seems to me to be the area of town where development might occur sooner than, out on the west side.
That's where we fit is either way. A lot, I mean, we've seen several.
Yes. And so the point, I guess, is that on those, in those areas,
That's revenue.
I mean, it just seems to me that if someone's gonna take out a home and put something else in there, an apartment, a duplex, or whatever, then,
We should do that. And just coming up with a policy that allows you to do that, like Forest Road one that we just had. How do you create a policy?
Just the people that front that street. And it's usually done by the
How do you create a policy that can match those without having a waiver process that it goes in front of us for us to kind of say, well, that makes sense? Because if you did that in a city road, then you would definitely have to put in a sidewalk on at Forest One that really doesn't make a lot of sense. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe
I think that's why I'm trying to offset it with some cost assistance there, the help. Well, we're gonna mandate it, this is a cost of development in Stephenville, but here's how we're gonna be able to help you out a little bit. I mean, but that's what these guys are here for, is to come up with a way to, yeah. I mean, I don't know, and again, I'm just spitballing, Brandon.
Well, that's what we wanted to open it up, just to have that conversation about, because clearly there's discussion for how we can make that process better. If we can make it better, let's make it better. But,
And I guess maybe the fundamental question is do sidewalks intrinsically make Stephenville better? Are sidewalks a good thing for Stephenville?
right.
I mean, and I don't even know that what the answer to that would be. And maybe that's something that we send out to the public, just send something out and say, what do you think about, what do you think about sidewalks? I mean, we may be fighting, we might be swimming upstream here, from what folks in town think, I don't know.
We haven't had a whole lot of use in our sidewalk program.
Maybe the sidewalk program, as we have it designed here in the deal, instead of going back and having a single lot and having to decide whether or not, even though, because it's a new development on that vacant lot, and it's in an existing addition, to decide whether or not that sidewalk needs to be there. Maybe when we talk about if absolutely mandatory that it be in all, that we should be talking about new additions. In other words, new ones, and then figure out a different system for those existing and older additions. And whether or not it should be waived in those areas or not.
I mean, I think there's probably a way we can come up with a percentage or something when we come back to help
If you've
fund
got-
some of those and some.
Right, if you take the lots in a block or an addition out here, and 60% of them have sidewalks in the thing, maybe then you better be thinking about everybody gets sidewalks, or 50%, or 40, whatever you want to do. If you're looking at an addition here, and all of a sudden you got a new, maybe a two-lot development that's going to go into it, and the only sidewalks in there are on one little lot over here on the far end of the thing, maybe that's not a good idea to require those people to do it, obviously. It hadn't been there. And you're never going to get it on all the rest of the lots anyway, unless the city wants to acquire the property and pay for it. And then that's raising a significant cost issue for the city.
Where we have problems, I wouldn't think, are new developments. It'd be easier to put that into it goes into the lot charge, whether you do it through revenue bonds, however you do it, whether the city pays for it, and there's an assessment, whatever it is. It's the infill lots, which really, in a sense, then, the development process needs to address that as well. If you bring in, look at where we have problems right now, we have this example here around town that, well, they need a sidewalk. Well, no one else in town does that. So maybe part of the answer is also, as we start doing developments, approving developments, PDs or other, is to say, it's gotta be filled out within a certain length of time. Or the development, we scale back the development, whatever, but you require the owner to fill up the lots, because that's where you end up with somewhere down the road, some house that didn't have a sidewalk or have something that we had, which now you gotta do something and say, well, my neighborhood doesn't require it.
And being consistent in that, I know that's hard because council's changed, but I mean, you can think of some of the subdivisions we've had that are fairly recent that don't have sidewalks.
Right.
Elkridge, I mean, they're still infill lots.
Well, look, almost everything west of Hartman.
Yeah.
I probably have a different opinion on this than what some of you do, but one of my thoughts is if we have existing businesses and homes, for example, that are not in compliance, and Steve can correct me if I'm wrong, but we require them to come into compliance with either wiring or plumbing or parking or other things as those properties sell and new owners take over. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Would that be a way to address some of these lots around town? You have a new infill lot, it doesn't have a sidewalk, and neither one of the ones on either side of it do, but through the process of attrition, those lots change hands, and it's not gonna happen quickly, but at some point in time, the majority of those lots are gonna have sidewalks, and if they're not on a curb and gutter, they'll have that too at some point, because the curb and gutter has other advantages besides what the sidewalk does, but the sidewalk's what we're talking about now, but those things kind of go hand in hand as those properties change through the years. There's no sidewalks in my neighborhood, but I wish there were. When my girls were little, I wish they could have got on the sidewalk and gone up and down to their grandparents' house, but they had to get in the street to do it. But, you know, and that's built in. But we've lived there for a number of years, and almost all of those homes have changed hands through the course of time. And that might be the way to go back and recover some of these lots that didn't have it when they were built. The new lots, and this is one of the issues, the new lots come in, and a developer, whoever that developer is, wants to put a home on this. Well, that developer has costs that he's putting into that, the cost of the lot, the dirt work, the plumbing, the building, all those things. and he's gonna recover those costs. Now, it may make the cost of that house go up $5,000 to put the sidewalk and curb and gutter in, but the developer's the one that cries about this, but the developer, he's gonna pass that along. The homeowner is gonna ultimately bear that in the cost of his mortgage. And, you know, that's another way to look at it. It's spread out over a number of years that way. Even though the developer pays it up front, the homeowner's gonna pay multiple years for that. That might be a way to look at some of these. And I've struggled with that too, because there's a couple of houses up the street from where I work that have curb and gutter because they have come in for permits to remodel, to do construction, to do things like that. Nothing on either side of them. But the next time that other house comes in for a permit, if we require that then, okay, we've got 2, and the next time we've got 3, pretty soon it goes block to block. And that, I don't know that that's a viable way to do it, but if that would be something we could put in and try to encourage and get everyone, to comply, it may take 50 years. But at some point, the majority of our streets will have curb and gutter, and the majority of our streets will have sidewalks. I think both of which are proven assets, not only to the longevity of the pavement, but the aesthetics and the safety of the neighborhood.
Councilman Nix, if I may, I kind of cast a broad net out there on my answer when I said yes, that we require them to bring it up to current standards. That's not necessarily true on just a conveyance of the property from one party to the next. When it is required is when you're making some type of repair that requires a permit, and I'll give an easy example. If you're wiring your home and you're changing the wiring inside the home and it's not up to current standards, we will require you to bring that particular issue up to current standards. But it's not as broad as I cast in saying that we require everything that conveys to be brought up to code.
Well, I'm sorry, I put you on the spot. That wasn't fair. But I intentionally made that broad. When properties change hands, generally there's some upgrading and some updating that's done. May require permits and may not. But if we had it established when that property changed hands, then this is part of that property, assuming that property and beginning ownership of it.
Absolutely, and for the purposes of the discussion tonight,
Right.
Development on a lot would require compliance with the subdivision
Correct.
requirements.
Or a change in use.
Yes, sir.
So if a home does not have code requirements, they have new code, and I sell it to Brandon had changed inside the house. It's only if he's changing use of the house, it's not just changing ownership.
Right.
So I would think that'd be the same with the sidewalks.
Yeah, I don't, just working in the real estate world, I don't know how you could ever make that work. Making them have to do a sidewalk that would really hurt your real estate market, I would think. I don't know.
Bottom line is, it all comes down to cost.
Yeah.
That's what it all comes down to. We could do a whole lot if we had unlimited funds.
Yeah.
The only logical way I can see right now to do it would be some sort of an overlay. There probably would be a lot of discussion on which areas that should or shouldn't be. I think maybe Alan was on the right track, or Gerald, I don't remember which one it was, but if a particular area, 2 or 3 block area, if there's 30 or 40% already has sidewalks, then maybe that area does need to be one that we require. If it's 10%, maybe we don't. I think that might just be something we have to get with.
Well, and I think it's
Maybe
something.
Brian could help us with that.
I'm a big believer if you're gonna require it, the city needs to do their part as well. And so we've done well getting some of these contracts for some of the state areas, but continue to look for funds that are available to go into some of these neighborhoods around the schools like Ernie did, and find funding to go in and replace some of it ourselves, to kickstart it, to snowball it, to try to get some of that going.
There's an ad hoc committee right now that's working in the community on finishing the trail,
Right.
which will include how many miles of sidewalk? 8 more miles of sidewalks, so, you know, the question is, do you have every sidewalk on every street, both sides of the street, or are we trying to improve sidewalks? And that might be one way to do it. Maybe we look at helping kickstart some of that funding then to help get that done. Because a bunch of that will be, some of it will be outside, around the edge of the city limit, down the river, you know, but some of it's gonna come right through the middle of neighborhoods as well. And some of it will be where there's sidewalks today, partial sidewalks, and maybe that will help finish it out or tear up what we got. And, you know, they're looking at how big a sidewalk, 10 foot, I think? 8 or 10 foot?
Where it's appropriate, it'll be 10-foot shared use. Standard sidewalk is 5 foot, so in some residential areas, it wouldn't make sense to do the shared use.
So that may be what we ought to do, is maybe look at helping kickstart some of those neighborhoods where that trail ends up going. Because they're looking, they think they have some funding for some of that now.
Okay. Well, we've got lots of ideas in there. Anybody else kind of will wrap up and took a lot of notes, and then staff can kind of bring us back and we can chew on some different ideas at the next committee meeting. Sound good?
Thank you, Rudy.
Thank you, guys.
Like that, thank you.
All right, and next we're going to talk about a multifamily permitting and inspection program. And again, I'm going to turn that over to Mr. Killen.
Yes, sir. So this was actually something that we had on radar back around March as a possible enhancement to development services and the services we offer to the community. Right about the time we started to discuss that is when COVID came along, and so we ended up not being able to have those meetings, and everything was kind of put on hold for a while. So it recently resurfaced, kind of always out there wanting to share that with the committee. And so during the budget review process, I had it in the budget request for the department to consider this program as an addition to services offered through the city or through development services. Didn't make it through the city manager's cuts or suggestions, so it's not in the recommendation from the city manager, but it was during the discussion that we had on that budget review, suggested that we make sure we get it back before the committee for consideration. So in your packet, I included the document that was submitted for consideration during the budget process, and what I was hoping that we could possibly accomplish if we chose to move forward with this particular program is to try to use user fees that would fund the program, so it'd be a net zero expenditures or revenue to the city based on the permit fees. We have 19 apartment complexes across the city, roughly 3,600 units, I believe, and this is generally in other cities I have experience with. This is a regulated industry. The intent behind the program is to make sure that the inhabitants are provided safe, affordable housing. And with the growing number of students that we're anticipating with the D1 transition, this was just a program that I thought might enable us to do a little better job in making sure that the properties are properly maintained, and then also just, again, provide additional services to the citizens of the city. We are recommending that if it is considered that we could bring on a clerical position, which would not be directly involved in the inspections, but would allow for time savings for the inspectors. Right now, inspectors do everything related to their job from A to Z, including folding, stuffing, putting postage on envelopes. So it's we're taking time from a higher paid position for a task that could probably be accomplished by someone in a lower paid position. That would enable us to put our inspectors in the field where they need to be. So this is a program that went under quite a bit of development back in the town that I used to work for. We had pretty good success with it there. I'd be possibly robbing a lot of the successes from there to try to bring it here. Even have a draft ordinance that we could pitch out on the table to begin the process if the council was so interested. The timing of it, again, is because of the way that the COVID disrupted a lot of our normal proceedings. And so I didn't fully intend for it to come and parallel the budget process. That wasn't by design, but it is the way it ended up timing-wise. So I'd be glad to answer any questions.
And I've, just to start off, I've met with Steve and we've kind of talked about this, and listen to the last thing, everybody thinks we have a lot of new apartment complexes come up, but we have a lot of older apartment complexes as well that are moving through the life cycle. And this is a way to make sure that as they continue to move through that life cycle, we have safe, quality, upkept housing, multifamily housing throughout our city as we continue to grow, and that those properties are held to a certain standard, which right now there isn't. You know, just in a general sense, I think the nicer that you're able to keep things, the better people take care of things, the better things look, the better people act, the better, you know, maybe less crime if there's it. I think it can have a lot of impact into it besides just making sure that our citizens are not living in dangerous conditions. And this isn't really directed, we still have, most of our stuff is locally owned, but we're continuing to have investors from all over the place that are absentee owners for a lot of multifamily stuff that's here. And so it's just a way to, personally, I think a good way to ensure that stays in the shapes that it should be. So I'll open it up to the committee to offer your thoughts, and if you think it would be something worth investigating and moving on with, or not. So,
Mr. Chair, can I ask that, for now, y'all just strictly consider the merits of the program itself and the potential fee schedule, any additional personnel we would request to talk about at a later date?
So just look at the program.
Yes,
Want to do the program. Absolutely.
So I would just ask Steve, we currently have, with the inspectors, the ability to add 3,600 additional inspections a year? I mean, that's within their capability?
Very good question. The program would be designed to inspect a representative sample of the units. So it'd be somewhat of a sliding scale based on the condition of the property, the age of the units. If we have any complaints, would be part of the matrix as well, but we would establish a matrix. So some of the more, I guess, the properties that have more prevalent issues we would spend more time there. The newer properties, we would spend less time. So the representative sample would be established through a matrix. These would be annual inspections. And then the performance on the inspection would dictate the number of follow-ups. If the performance if it's below a satisfactory performance, there's also a component called a comprehensive inspection where that would trigger a full inspection of the entire complex in a 60-day compliance period to bring the property into compliance. So it's...
So let me back up just 1 second. So if one unit was significantly out of compliance, that would trigger a total inspection of the entire property then?
The program model that I have in my mind would be if the representative sample, if it's a 100-unit complex and you do 20 inspections, 20 different units, and these are by consent only. If you have more violations than you have units inspected, that ratio is a 1-to-1 ratio. If it goes above that 1-to-1 ratio, that triggers the comprehensive inspection.
And then it would be a flat fee, you'd propose a flat fee. If it's 100 units, it'd be 100 times $12 per unit.
Correct.
And then you inspect maybe 20% of the units or 10% or whatever.
Correct. And then we could also build in, if it were so desired, we could build in surcharges if they didn't perform or didn't meet the compliance schedule. Late fees for not paying their permit fees at the end of the inspection cycle. And then there's also something that we consider would be if you're out more than 3 times to verify compliance, then it's an inspection fee for the follow-up inspection per unit or per building. The representative sample would be for the interior dwelling inspections only, and then we would inspect the exterior in full for every building on the complex.
Steve, if you get a complaint, if the city gets a complaint from a person who's renting property of unsafe conditions, do we send out an inspector to take a look at that now?
We will.
Not then, but is that the practice today?
Today, if we receive a complaint, even if we don't necessarily have the authority to perform the inspection, I ask that we at least make contact with the management, and that's for any property across the city.
Okay. Maybe I'm playing the devil's advocate here, but it would seem that we're trying to, this is regulation, in a way, it's kind of a tax type of thing too. Are we want to have safe living conditions. I'm assuming that's what the purpose for this is. Does not the market take care of that? I mean, you can drive down the street, nobody's going to rent it if it's a flea bag place. Does not the market take care of some of that? This is the devil's advocate part of this deal.
Well, absolutely. A very, very fair question and complicated question to answer, but yes, the market will drive some of the housing decisions, but not always. There's a population out there that may not be able to make the decision to move on to the next property. So it's also the affordability aspect of the housing and the safe housing is kind of combined into the truly the impetus of the entire program. So not disagreeing with you in any regard, but it is, I think when you take in consideration that not every person in the population may be able to make that decision, this allows for the regulation of those properties.
Is there, right now, is there any regular inspection program, whether it's a fire marshal inspection or code compliance does that happen if ownership of a complex changes hands, does that happen? Or is there any regular program that's in place right now?
Well,
this would be similar to like what a commercial building would go through.
Our typical inspections now are strictly associated with the construction phase and the issuance of a CO. And once that CO is issued, we're not really involved at that point.
I'm sorry.
I deal with inspectors in 8 different cities in the business I run. And one of the things I see is there's no phrase they use, the local authority having jurisdiction. Whatever I want it to be is what it's going to be. And the concern I have is we end up with rules that I have that somebody, what I wouldn't want us to have is some rule that says, this is what looks nice. It says here, exterior conditions. I would hope that we would get more definitive. It is a true life safety code issue. It's not that someone's soffit is down, because he's going to find that in his inspection, and it's going to be part of the closing statement that they would fix that soffit. So that we're talking about stuff like pipes, exposed wires, fire hazards, etc. Not conditions in the sense that it would be general maintenance kinds of things that someone, like you were asking, someone then gets to make their own decision about what my property looks like. Because that's why you look at all the big cities, that's why the costs are going up so much, is we put another regulation in someone's interpretation what that regulation is. So what is it ought to look like? Well, there's got to be some standard that we can say, this is the rule, and have an appeal process that says, if you think my condition's unsafe, I can appeal that decision someplace else, that you just can't come in and say, you've got to do something to your property.
Mayor,
Now,
that's,
if it's safety, you know, it's gonna burn down and Jimmy's crew's gonna be injured inside the building, I don't have a problem with stuff like that. But it's when you get in, when you define things like interior conditions, exterior conditions, I wanna make sure we were clear that this is for safety, not appearance. Because what looks nice to me, what I think ought to look like on a fence is, I think the owner's description, other than when you build the building, you get a permit. Would be certain codes.
I agree with that. One of the things, and maybe I read it in here somewhere, was then it expands in the future at some point to include rentals that are single-family rental type thing, situation, not apartments.
Lots of cities do that.
Yeah.
that would certainly be.
And we're at what, 54% of our housing units in this town are rentals?
Yes, sir. It's the majority of our homes.
How much?
I heard it was 54%, is that wrong?
60. I think it's 60.
60%? That's a really high figure.
That's a way to get
So, if I may address your comments, the city has adopted the 2015 International Property Maintenance Code, so that's what we would base our inspections on. And what we could do to address the points that you made, I have some experience where we categorize the violations that we called out on inspections into life safety critical and non-critical. And our follow-ups would actually only be for the life safety and the critical. We would not follow up on non-critical items, but we would note them on the inspection because those do affect the aesthetics. And from the exterior, I think if it's our desire to try to improve the aesthetics across the community, then we could at least call those out and bring their attention to what we would like to see them repair, but not necessarily hold them to the enforcement measures if they didn't make the repairs.
But just like life safety code, if I build a building and it's commercial for whatever reason, whatever function, and I meet a code that's a 1989 code, unless I change function, I don't have to upgrade that code. I don't have to change those fire codes.
Correct.
So it would be, so we've adopted a code. Are you gonna go back then and say, well, that house was built in 1963, so what was the code? Well, there wasn't any code back then. So, I mean, those are the kinds of problems you run into. And I just want you to know, when it comes to inspections, I have 108 or 9 facilities or locations that get inspected. And the application by city, by inspector, is so varied, and from one inspector leaves, another one comes, they change as well. And so I'm real sensitive to that, because you turn around and say, well, wait a minute, I've been doing this for 15 years, and it's never been a problem. Now I got this new guy comes in, guess what I gotta start doing? So I just wanna make sure that we're very clear about what it's coding, and that if we do it, I would encourage that the ordinance be specific to say it can't be expanded without council approval, that it go to something, it's more broad, I guess would be the way of saying it.
Yes, sir.
I think it's important to note that my thought process is more life safety.
Right.
Roofs missing for 6 months that you could have.
And I think you have a very good member, your chair of the committee, to go over those kind of things. That's what he does for a living. I mean, how many do you in your business do a year?
Well, and I will just say, Tony, I probably get 3 or 4 calls every 2 weeks, a couple of calls a week, about tenants wanting me to go look at rental properties, and I don't do that. So I think there is somewhat of a need on that, whether it's, people, their floors have holes in them, they have bare wires and stuff, so that's the point I'm coming at it from, is I think there is, but I think it is life safety, not, you need new paint, you need new whatever. But to Gerald's point, multifamily is probably not our biggest thing with the 60% rental. The housing is more, but if you started with this, it could be something that led to you being able to manage some of that better, that you could try to keep the slumlord type things from running down neighborhoods and taking advantage of your citizens in certain points.
Would there be, to answer part of your issue, would you be able to have, maybe institute a complaint process where a tenant could file a safety complaint, which would initiate then some inspection at that point?
And I think that's something that we should look at too as well, because maybe we have somebody in place fairly new to building this process, but that is an issue that we need to have some.
And that might be maybe that's a step, Brendan, in moving this direction, frankly. If you have a much more formalized approach to those type of complaints, that are safety related. I've heard I'm sure you've seen them. I've seen some of these places myself that you didn't have working restroom in there. You didn't have, the running water was not exactly good, bare wires and everything like that. I mean, these were all safety standards that weren't being met, and people were actually living there.
Right.
So if we had some kind of system in place,
Part of that is adding workload. Where do we add workload to already overworked staff without some kind of revenue generation type situation?
well, Alan said that they only asked them to work for half a day. Didn't care which 12 hours that was. Isn't
Now,
that right, Alan?
I walked across the street with two of them, I wouldn't agree that's probably what they told me. I heard a whole lecture about it across the street over there. They said, don't tell anybody in that room that I said this stuff.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I like the idea of a formal complaint process, but like you said, I don't know how you fund that, because if you're doing automatic inspections, it's pretty easy to assess a fee on that, but I don't know about a formal complaint. Then you deal with disgruntled tenants, and you can have all kinds of issues.
What triggers an inspection in your?
Well, right now, let me just give one example. Just this last week, the state of Texas used to have an inspection form that they did every 6 months of every home that I manage. And that inspection form was about 18, and there were principles, so the inspector had some leeway as to whether or not it was a practice problem. Well, because they were having difficulty enforcing it everywhere, now they're codifying in Texas Administrative Code 40 specific things that are check marks. And every one of those then becomes a potential deficiency, which has a potential administrative code, which in our sense would be you gotta fix your program, you gotta do something, spend some money. And that's how, there is a principle here of keeping safe environments, attractive environments, get out the slumlords. At the same time, though, not create a bureaucracy that starts telling people, your house has to look like this, or you have to have this in your home, et cetera. So that's why I'm saying, NFPA, NEC codes, I understand something that is a safety. So how do you, if it was safety, in some cases, it wouldn't necessarily even have to be his department, it could be the fire department. They do fire, they come inspect my place every year, 100 and something of them. In some cities, they require me to do more than that, or often than that. So there's other ways to do it with existing staff, I would assume. But I don't disagree that the principle is a good one. I really do. It's just that I'm real sensitive to starting off with, we're trying to keep people safe, and now we've got this administrative code that it just goes crazy. And that's what bureaucracies do, that's what government does, always does, because then someone's filed an appeal, there's been a complaint, there's gotta be a newspaper article, etc. And then what do? Well, we get a little more detailed in there, to find a little bit more, so I got more, that's how bureaucracy happens. And like I said, I'm sensitive to it because I deal with government every day, all day, around the state of Texas, and it's a constant battle to do what's right and safe versus, when I got in the business, we had a set of manuals that probably wasn't 600 pages. And I guarantee you could fit them on the floor all the way across this room now and not touch them all. And then the sad part is there's interpretive abilities for individuals. What's the interpretive guideline? What does that mean? If you're doing NFPA, you can go buy the NFPA manual. It says, what does it mean? They give you pictures, they give you drawings, here's what it looks like, here's how they give you examples of how to bring it into compliance. And that's not what we're talking about here. And that's scary because I think what will happen is at some point, my fear would be, we start working towards that direction is my only concern. At the same time, start with the slumlords, you know, I'm a landlord, and if someone calls me and says, I got a problem with it, I go fix it. There's not everybody that does that, and I wish we could change that. And I respect what you're doing here is, you know, especially when you look at multifamily, maybe we do something where we create just a code that says, we have just like you would a brand new apartment complex, there's certain things that you require, go back to the code where they built that building and say every 2 years or whatever, we have an automatic inspection. It just automatically comes and does it. Fortunately, Steveville doesn't charge me for fire marshal inspections. You don't hear me say that. You know, some cities do.
We are working on the fee schedule.
Your evaluation's coming up when? But, I mean, so there's a point that you know, maybe we could do it from that perspective. If apartments are the issues, or multifamily are the issues, we start with something like that and just say, if there's a change of hands, or we just create a permitting process that you know, I gotta get licensed, and so I go through an annual licensing process, and there's a fee associated with it. And that may be one of the ways to do it, start with multifamily. I mean, my gracious. The kids' parents are gonna pay for those. I think their risk will go up. You know, it will. But maybe that's the way to do it, instead of you know, add a complaint process, but also just every 2 years or every 3 years, whatever, get a re-permitted to occupy. Now that, I don't know, legally Jimmy's, our attorney's not here any longer, but I don't know if we could do that or not. Can we?
I would think so.
Maybe that's the way of doing it, and start off with the ones that are the problems, you know, the multifamily, which sounds like. Because you're right, we're going through the life cycle. That's a good phrase to use because that's what happens in every building. You know, that's why Magnolia Farms make so much money is they take that life cycle and bring it back. So there's nothing wrong with that. I really don't have a problem, and it's just the details are where my concerns are. I mean, I get nailed sometimes on stuff, and I spent $5,000 on a particular house that they say is out of code. I appeal it, but you have to, you know, they will shut you down if you don't get it done within so many days. I appeal it, guess what? 6 months later, they say, you didn't have to do that. That person misinterpreted the rules. I don't want to get to that level in our town, but we got a problem we're going to deal with. So I appreciate the effort. I just don't know where that is. I just don't want us to go too far. And what we start, sometimes if you don't start the rule with, okay, it's got, you know, here's where we're going to start. We're going to be very common sense about it. And the rule has to say, but we won't go past that without council approval. Because then all of a sudden it's just, we just start writing more rules and more interpretations and whatever. Before you know it, my gosh, you know, we've got a state bureaucracy here on inspections when all we were trying to do was keep people safe.
Right.
And I preach, and I apologize, Brandon, I didn't mean to do that.
No, but at some point, the building has outlived it's like having an elementary school have issues for 30-something years. You know, you don't want the building to outlive its usefulness too. So, I mean, there's got to be a balance there.
Well, there may be some, that's where the permitting, you know,
Right.
everything, buildings have a permit every so many years, maybe. Every 3 years or something like that.
That's a way that we could go back and look at it.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your input.
Mr. Chair, I think it's a concept worthy of at least investigating a little farther. There's the potential for some problems, but there's some potential for some benefits for all of our residents also. And I think the potential there is huge in the benefit side. I've got a couple of questions. Does it apply to duplexes as well as the multifamily, or is it above a certain number?
It could be whatever we wanted it to be. The program that Steve kind of went at, and because I appreciate him trying to come with something cost neutral and finding a way to fund something to help it.
Absolutely.
But this is just looking at straight apartment complexes, not duplexes.
Okay.
In our conversations that we've had, we've talked about understanding that being a need, along with rental properties that are, you know, a 2-bedroom house in a certain area being a spot of need at some point as well. But this is just directly apartments at this time.
Okay.
But it could turn into a formal complaint line type thing, that was talking about.
I think I know the answer to this question, but would we as a city have the authority to investigate something that was state-owned rather than privately owned?
No.
I feared that to be the case.
The only code that the state has to conform with, I think, is the fire code.
Okay. Okay. But I think it's a worthy concept, and it obviously needs some fine tuning, but I think it's something worth pursuing, and I appreciate Steve bringing it to our attention.
Thanks, sir.
And it's good to have some fresh eyes and some fresh ideas come in, and with some things like this, I think that's excellent.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Yeah, Brandon, I think we ought to explore these things.
Well, again, we took some good notes here, and let's hope that, I'll get with Steve and we'll kind of talk about the program a little more and the staff and kind of can bring it back again. And I think it's always good to have these conversations, chew on them, spit them up, tear them up sometimes, draw lines through them, make them better and come back, and then we'll end up with something that's good for all the citizens. So with that, I will adjourn the Development Services Committee.
Thank you.
With nothing else, thanks, Steve. With nothing else on the agenda, it's 6:47, and this city council committee meeting will be adjourned.